predavatelj Steven, vodja oddelka, ki se pri IFLI ukvarja s področjem politike zagovorništva. Njegova ekipa se ukvarja z vprašanji v zvezi z avtorskimi pravicami, razvojem, dediščino, kulturo, upravljanjem interneta in človekovimi pravicami. Pred nami, oziroma pač predaval bo gospod, človek, ki prihaja iz IFLE, tako da prosim, pripravite vprašanja.
Get this sorted out. I'll start and I'll just speak loud. So, okay, if I do this, this is best for people online. So, I've had fun getting here. I arrived into Frankfurt about 5 minutes after the plane to Ljubljana left, and sort of sitting there with a sandwich that's twice as big as anywhere else in Europe because it's Germany, and got an email from Lufthansa saying they'd put me on a flight back to Amsterdam. And then I looked at the title of the conference about proactivity in libraries and thought I should also do proactivity in airports. And so I gave someone from Lufthansa a hard time and ended up going to Zagreb and spent the night there and then came here. So I've only slept for 3 hours or so. And I'm conscious that when I've not slept enough, there are a couple of risks. I tend to go a little bit more English. And so firstly, any sense of structure or organization in what I say just goes. The gap, the difference between what I find funny and everyone else finds funny also gets very wide. So I might make some jokes that don't work. And finally, my accent goes quite London and it goes quite quick. And in the UK, having a London accent makes people think of people who sell stolen televisions on markets.
That's not true.
Oh yeah. Oh, we can do a proper London accent. You sound like a illegal market seller. It is East London is really bad for that. So if I start sounding like I'm selling you a stolen TV, just put your hand up and say, because there is that risk. Anyway, substance. So I was invited to come and talk a little bit about advocacy. And I think actually, I don't know, advocacy and proactivity are very much the same thing. The fact of advocating means that you're not just doing your job, but you're showing people that you're doing your job and that you're showing the value of what you're doing, And I think really importantly, you're trying to make things change. Advocacy for us is all about, at IFLA and especially Knowledge Rights 21, is about making sure that the people who take decisions about libraries take the right decisions with the right information, with a modern, up-to-date view of what libraries are and a modern, up-to-date view of what libraries need. So I'm going to start with a little test. When I say advocacy, what do you think? And so I want to look into his weird, pixelated eyes and think, what does advocacy make you think of? Something's gone fun. So the text here should be, are you just too busy to do advocacy? Do you just not have time? And I'm conscious that librarians are expected to do everything. It's as bad as with primary school teachers who are expected to do health and social care and be psychiatrists and be educators and be parents and be everything else. Librarians are very easily expected to do everything. And so it's normal to think that you're too busy. Is it too complicated? Is it just there are too many moving parts? There are too many things. You have to understand too much. You need too much knowledge to get involved. Is it simply too confusing? Does it just not make sense? It's strange people in strange places, some of whom seem to be stuck in a musical goose. It does look like a musical goose, but it's every day in the Netherlands, this apparently. Is it just too confusing? Does it just not make any sense? Is it scary? Is it something that actually makes you worried? And I get that. It's not always natural to want to promote yourself and talk about yourself. It's not always natural to want to talk to people who aren't like you. It's unpredictable, different cultures. The text here is too unnecessary. something's gone fun with. I should have sent this as a PDF so it didn't mess up this way, but that's okay. Is it just that, well, it's fine. We don't need to do advocacy. It's not a core thing. The results, the impact is not going to be high enough. Do you feel that you are too small to do advocacy? It's very easy to think that advocacy is about talking to members of parliament and ministers and presidents and so on. It's very easy to think, well, they're way up there in the stratosphere, kilometers away from where you are, that you're too small to do it. This is simply not your job. It's not, I don't know, as said, the function when we talk about librarianship, it's all very much focused on providing a service, on doing something directly to help people. It's about doing, not talking necessarily. So it's very easy to think that advocacy isn't your job. Or, I do like this Twisted Sister cover. Sorry, it's a bit of an 80s hair metal reference. Or is it something that actually gets people really excited? Does it get you sort of powered up and want you to go and put makeup on and scream at people? This guy was very good in Congress, actually. There's a fantastic video of this guy speaking to the US Senate. So he does advocacy. So this is where I ask you to put your hands up. I won't be taking notes, so that's okay. So for how many of you do you just feel like you're too busy to do advocacy? That's fair. Are some of you not busy enough? Is it, sorry? Is it potentially too complicated? That's good. It's good honesty. Is it just too hard to understand, too confusing? It can definitely be that. I don't know, whenever I try to wander around the European Parliament website, I feel that also. Is it a bit scary, like this confused llama? Yep, I think so. Is it just doesn't feel very necessary? She invited me here. I don't know what. Is it, you can feel this a bit too small, that I don't know, it's something that people do higher up? I think that's often a thing. Not your job? Like this French snowman? So in the UK, we amuse ourselves by laughing at the French. And so basically our image of the French, well, that's so you'll have this about Croats and Austrians and whatever, we have it about the French. So, or are you motivated and up for doing it? Okay, I might ask that question at the end to see if more people put their hands up. So I'm now going to take you on a little bit of an existential journey. That is Mr. Boutros Ghali, which I think I've mainly included him because I love his name. But he obviously has doubts about what I'm for, at least according to the slide I've put up. I'm very conscious, just as an interlude, as an English person, I'm very comfortable with the negative. We do a lot in the negative. It's not very American. If it was an American being up here, it would all be very positive. I'm English, we don't do that. But there's a reason. So I'm going to run through just a few of the arguments that I think it's easy to feel about why we don't need to do advocacy, why advocacy isn't important, and then one by one, hopefully take them down. There will be 3 slides that are positive at the end. So after like the 25 negative ones, you'll have 3 positive ones, which is the appropriate balance as far as I'm concerned. So a first argument that it's easy to have is that libraries have been around forever. You know, they've been around for 2,000, 2,500 years. They're a long-term thing. It's very easy to think that they will continue to exist forever. But they said that about telephone exchanges. And they said that about post offices and things like that. And these things disappear. You know, we have a function, I think we're all very much aware that the information environment is changing. It's extremely easy for people to assume that we don't need libraries anymore. And I think it's also really important that we remember that as a public service, for those whose budgets are paid by local government or national government, as part of an institution, for university libraries, for special libraries, the people paying out could spend the money on something else. And it's not an easy thought, but in a local government, they could be putting more money on parks, or they could be putting more money on primary schools, or they could be putting more money on something else. And I know that we don't feel like we are in competition with these things, and we're not in competition with these things. In some ways, we do need to explain why it's necessary to have libraries as part of something else, because otherwise, and we've seen this sadly in the UK, it's very easy to say, well, what is the cut that's going to cause the most pain? What's going to annoy the most people? And far too often it's been easy for local governments to say, well, you know, if we cut in education, we hurt the children, and children are nice on photos, and we don't want to have unhappy children on photos. But there's a risk that they will cut in libraries. So we need to actually say, we can't assume that just because we've been there for a long time, we will always be there. Again, sorry, I should have done this as a PowerPoint. I'm in the public sector, I can't do advocacy. This is another standard argument, and I get that if I've worked for government before, if you're working in government, you've probably signed a contract that says that you won't openly criticize the government, or you won't criticize your employer. Now, it's entirely normal, I get that. Two ways around this, though. Firstly, publicly, there's a difference. You can do internal advocacy and external advocacy. Internal advocacy is about making sure that within your institution, within your hierarchy, you have your arguments, you have your evidence, you're showing the value, the quality of what you're doing. You're making sure that if your boss or your funder is looking at you, they think, well, the library is a success story, it's something we can be proud of. But there's also obviously the role of the association. I know that, for example, with IFLA as an association, with the Slovenian Library Association, you have a civil society organization. And so while the people working, the volunteers there, will often work in the public sector, you can put your association hat on, and then actually you are allowed to go out. So it's very important to underline, just because we are public servants, it doesn't mean we can't do advocacy. We just have to be a little bit cleverer about how we do it. You need to be senior to do advocacy. And again, it's often felt that, yes, you need to be able to send the director in to do this. You need to be able to send the principal person in to go and talk to the minister or whatever. Now, obviously from country to country, hierarchy changes. Some countries are more focused on hierarchy. The French. I'll try not to have a go. I didn't come here intending to be rude about France, but it's just happening. No. Some countries are more focused on hierarchy, that you need the top person to come along in order to do things. However, firstly, that's not always the case. If you can present well, if you can present clearly, then that can make a difference. But there's a role for everyone. Advocacy is definitely not something that only the people on top can do, because as we'll show a little bit later, advocacy firstly depends on great professionals doing a good job. I don't know, the worst sort of advocacy is to do our jobs badly and let people see that, because no one wants to pay someone who does their job badly. But advocacy also builds on this huge stock of examples, of communication, of evidence, and that can't just come from the top, that has to come from the field as a whole. That's another one of my prejudices here, that advocacy is only for people with nice socks, and people with nice socks, by which I mean lawyers and lobbyists. I apologize to anyone who has nice socks here. It's not personal. But capitals are full of lawyers and lobbyists and people with nice socks, also nice cufflinks as well. It's very easy to think that advocacy is the same thing as lobbying. And I don't know, I don't know if you use the word lobbying in Slovene. I assume it's got a bad meaning. Yeah, it's not great in English. It's really bad in French, because when the French want to say that something is bad, they use the English word as well. So this is sounding obsessive now. I do love France. I live there. However, no, again, lobbying is one end of the scale. it is helpful to have people who have the minister on WhatsApp, who know really sinister things like the minister's grandchildren's names and their birthdays and weird stuff like that. But again, that's only one end of the scale. And something that's really powerful about libraries, more than a big publisher or a big lobby group or a big business in the capital, they aren't in every town and village in the country. They don't have that reach. Maybe they sell books there, but they're not physically there. Whereas libraries, we are. We have this amazing reach throughout the country, and that gives us a huge legitimacy. That gives us a real strength because we are serving people everywhere. We are a genuinely national legitimate sector, a genuinely national legitimate group. And so showing that, being able to say that no, we are everywhere, that we represent, that we understand the needs of people everywhere is really important. Advocacy isn't part of our daily work. Again, as said, librarianship is so often about doing rather than saying. However, I'd like to argue, and I will make this point a few times, and this is the lack of organization and structure that's coming through right now. If we believe in what we're doing, and if we believe that what we are doing is valuable enough to be supported, then we probably need to make sure that we actually are supported to do it. If you think that something's important, you don't just let it float down the river or disappear off. If we value what we're doing, if we're convinced by the importance of our work, we need to talk about it. And so it is part of our work, but we'll come on to it. It's not always so hard, because I also want to say that you don't need to be a specialist to do advocacy. It's also easy, and it's often people who sell advocacy courses that take 2 weeks do like to say that you need to take 2-week courses to be good at advocacy. I think there's something going on there. It doesn't take you can contribute to advocacy, you can be an advocate, and you can support efforts for advocacy in short periods of time. We did a whole series called the 10-Minute Library Advocate. There are things you can do if you experience something that justifies, that provides a reason for changing. If you encounter a frustration, because you know that a service is needed, you know that a user really needs access to a book, but you can't get access to it. If you know that someone really needs a service, but you don't have the budget to do it, that's a failure, but it's also an advocacy story. It's something that you can use to then go along and say, well, we know the need is there, we need it. This is evidence, this is something you can use. You don't need a 2-week course to do that. You don't need to be a specialist. Again, similarly, being too busy, it's understood, yes, you can't just drop everything and go to Ljubljana for a day to go and talk to MPs and so on. But again, you can do things in 10 minutes. If you organize and if you all think about how you can work together, then there's so much that you can do. It's also, and I think linked to that, it's not a solo sport. And something that we often come across is that within associations, within national library fields, there's a feeling that there's Mrs. or Mr. advocacy. And so if someone needs to do policy, if someone needs to talk to government, they'll do it, it's fine. And then of course they retire or they change jobs, and then suddenly you realize that you've lost all your contacts and you don't really know how to do it anymore. And that's a problem that we see in lots of parts of Europe and the world. Advocacy is not a solo sport. Advocacy requires a whole combination of skills that everyone has. Collectively, we all have these skills. Advocacy should be a team activity. It should be something that we do as a group, and it's also a lot more fun that way. Finally, I should say a little bit about copyright, because that's the particular focus of Knowledge Rights 21. I'm conscious that if library advocacy feels something that's far away and hard and complicated, library copyright advocacy it's twice as far, 3 times as far. I'm conscious that copyright is always seen as being something that is complicated and conflictual and involves fighting and lawyers, and you'll never achieve anything because you're fighting with these multi-million euro companies. copyright really matters. Copyright decides what we can do with the stuff we have. We can have the biggest budgets in the world. You can have millions and millions of euros to spend on acquisitions and licensing. But if the law doesn't allow you to let people access them, it's pointless. I don't know, we have a story from the UK. The National Library, the British Library, it's a well-funded institution. That's good. But the law does not allow it to give remote access. And so all of this money is dependent on, can people travel to London? Can people actually travel to get there? There's so much impact that the library could have if it could allow more to be done with its collections, if it could allow research access, if it could give access to teachers, to educators to do things. And so we need to get those rights correct. We need to get those provisions right. So this is just, we're getting on to some positive slides at last. I think these are probably the three key messages that I hope you can take away with you. I think the first really important one is that advocacy is part of librarianship. I'll talk a bit more. That copyright and funding, that obviously advocating for funding is great, but we should be a little bit more sophisticated. We need to think about how money is spent. And finally, that everyone can be a library copyright advocate. I'm happy for the slides to be shared afterwards as well. And I might share them as a PDF so they show up properly. So advocacy is part of being a librarian. And this is the point I made earlier, because if we believe in what we do, we should mobilize for it. If we take the existence of libraries for granted, we'll lose them. There is no, again, this is a Western European concept. Back in the 17th century, people like to talk about the divine right of kings, that you could be a king just because God chose you, not because the people chose you. And so you just had a right to be there. And that generally ended badly. People who talked about that tended to end up in two separate pieces with their heads in baskets. Not a great period of history. There's no divine right of libraries. We have to be able to explain why they are important. We have to show and make clear that libraries are an essential service, that actually we are an innovative service. I don't know, I think we're in an age where the importance of information inclusion, of integrity, of information skills is becoming clearer and clearer. And we can't let that happen without libraries. There's an opportunity, but people will forget us if we don't talk about it. So if we believe in what we do, if we believe in the value and the power of librarianship, we need to make sure that the people taking the decisions about the laws and the money also hear about it. When we advocate, we need to advocate for funding to be able to do our jobs, but we also need to make sure we have the right rules. As said, copyright is one side of the same coin as funding. And so it's really important to think not just about the money, but be ready to be a bit imaginative, to focus in different areas. So you have the rights to partner with other institutions, that you can potentially seek sponsorship, so that you have the rights to actually use the material you have. And then finally, and I'll definitely share the slides for this, this is a tool that we have. It's the Library Advocacy Copyright Capacities Grid. And the whole idea here is actually to show that advocacy is made up of a number of things, that it's not just, there is lobbying, building relations with decision makers, but it's also about understanding the landscape, doing what librarians should do best, that understanding where information comes from, following it, about coordination, about mobilizing, talking to colleagues, getting people excited, talking to users. It's about gathering evidence. Those stories, even those frustrations, can be really powerful arguments. Every time you're frustrated because you can't do anything, you shouldn't take it as being, it's just a bad day. You can almost keep a little book of stories of when things haven't worked because the funding isn't right or the law isn't right. But these are useful. These are practical examples of what needs to change. You should use them. These have potential. Communicating, if you can do social media right, if you can write well, if you can design, this is all powerful. You know, people like things to be well designed and well promoted. Building partnerships, talking with schools, talking with teachers' unions, talking with journalists, talking with researchers, talking with innovators. These are all groups that share goals with us. They all share the goal of informed, inspired, empowered communities. We're absolutely not on our own. I know there's a very bad habit in libraries that we tend to just sort of see ourselves as being on our own and we need to do everything ourselves. And sometimes that's helpful, because sometimes just being ready to get up and look after our own problems is important, but we don't need to. There's plenty of sympathies, there's plenty of support out there, so we should be ready to go and look for it. And then obviously at the end, making sure that we evaluate, that we look back, we see what works, what hasn't worked, and move forward. I'm here speaking today on behalf of Knowledge Rights 21. I said I'll share the slides. I think the key function, the key role of Knowledge Rights 21 is to support the ability of libraries across Europe to be really effective advocates on the laws that affect how you can use material, on access, sharing, use, application of materials. Crucially, it's built on that idea that we need laws in the digital age. If we let the digital age progress without regulation, it's a wild west. Everything is done by contract. Everything is done by that sort of 20-page document that you're supposed to read before you click when you buy something on the internet, and no one does. That's actually the law now, because it's a contract, and apparently you've read it and agreed to it, so you don't need to listen to the law. These things need to be regulated. There needs to be a guarantee that libraries can do their jobs, that we aren't just told to do something by Elsevier or Springer or whatever. We need to actually have protections in law. In Slovenia, we're lucky to have Maja Bogataj, who I assume that plenty of you will know. She's more glamorous than I am. So just imagine a more glamorous and legally minded version of me. I really encourage you to get in touch to work with her. She's got a fantastic series of activities planned for the coming months. That there'll be a series of webinars on copyright. There'll be a conference, an Open Knowledge Day, which I assume will be in Ljubljana. That she's doing some work around obstacles to open science. So I think especially people in university libraries and special libraries, think about that. What's stopping you from pursuing your open science goals? She's obviously getting involved in law, but when getting involved in law, it's always really important to have that evidence, those voices, that experience from the ground, and in shaping broader IP strategies. So I really encourage you, when she reaches out, do look to work with her. She does, based in Slovenia, but also works across Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, Macedonia, Montenegro. And so also I'm looking at you, Serbs. So also outside of Slovenia, she also has a role there. Then at the European level, we can share the slides. At the European level, we run a series of webinars. We are producing reports that hopefully you can use in your advocacy, and we'll be looking forward to getting involved, especially with the European Parliament elections, especially for Slovenian Croatians here. We'll be looking to actually get involved, so we'll also be happy to get in touch. So practically, please do visit our X, Twitter, feed. Come onto our website and say it's not called X. I'm sorry, it's called Twitter. Look on our website. You can sign up to our mailing list there. We'll keep you informed of what's going on. Send us an email if you'd like to be more involved. And I shared Maya's email earlier. Because the idea is that we should get from hiding to that, go from left to right. That is the objective, and see that being advocacy, proactivity, they're the same thing, and that they're absolutely essential if we are to be able to continue to provide value to really make a difference. So thank you.
Stephen, thank you for the lecture. Any questions, please? Barbara?
I hope I stuck to time. I didn't.
It's okay.
I didn't hear anything.
Okay,
I wasn't really paying attention.
I have to start, of course, because I usually have questions. We rarely, here we are very conservative when it comes to advocacy, because of the thing that you mentioned, because it smells too much of lobbying and we kind of shy away. And it was interesting, the things that you said, I think when Sasha was talking about this yesterday. So the library things that we're doing to get people involved in libraries. So they don't even know that they've been tricked that they are using libraries. So in that kind of a thing, so that is a bit a workaround. And I'm guessing that advocacy is the same thing. So you basically you don't call it advocacy, but you're doing it anyway. And if I understood correctly, your advice is not to be too specialized and just go for it. You miss, but you will miss a lot, but you will win some as well. Yes. So I know, because I'm following, of course, and you're doing a lot of work and talks and how to be a advocacy in 10 minutes. I think it's yeah. Do you think it's better for people in general, so to just at least follow along, and then at some point they will get involved? So it's better to be informed basically on in case that someday we will use everything. So like just getting all the information. And do you think it's better for us as librarians from this region, because I know there's colleagues here, to get involved with Maya or get involved ourselves? What is your advice?
So I think it's a good question. So I would recommend, if it's something specifically focused on changing national laws around copyright in particular, I think it's worth coordinating with Maya. We don't necessarily need to have a spokesperson we don't necessarily need to have a spokesperson for libraries, but it does make sense to make sure that, especially when it comes to interactions with senior decision makers and politicians there, that we try to have at least a consistent argument. It doesn't mean it has to be the same person making the argument, and often actually a variety of people making the same argument is more powerful than just the same person, because politicians know lobbyists. I don't know, I'm sure that when Maya walks past the reception desk at the ministry, they just say, oh, her again. And in some ministries, they will try and like all run away and hide. And in some ministries, they may be more favorable. And that's what happens with lobbyists. It's the same with the European Parliament. You can see that when the head of the European Publishers Association walks in, you can almost see some people like sort of running away because they don't want to talk to her, which we love. It's important to have a variety. I don't know, coordinating is important, but I think that's really on the lobbying end of things. I think there's so much work that we can do within communities and at the more local level. And I think more broadly to make sure that, you know, in English you'd say to prepare the ground. Because if people haven't heard about libraries, if their idea of what a library is dates back to the 1970s, when they were studying, or when they were a child, or whatever, that's not a good starting point. There's so much we can do right now. For example, I don't know how the elections work here, whether each member of parliament has an area they represent, or there's like a national list, but every member of parliament comes from a place. And so a good practice is to find out where they come from, where they have their local office, and make sure they come to the library. Invite them to come along at a conference like this. Invite someone from the government to come along, show them that there is a community of smart, active, proactive people who are trying to do really interesting things. I don't know, the Nordics do this in a fantastic way, that you'll have, I don't know, in Finland, the Minister for Social Security is also the president of the Library Association. And so you have someone, it's amazing, like this doesn't happen in the UK, but why not invite a president along? Why not invite a minister or a member of parliament along? Let them see how, I don't know, exciting and dynamic this is, because then actually maybe you're not lobbying them because you're not asking them to do a specific thing, but you are showing them that this is what libraries actually are, and this is what libraries actually do, and this is the impact that libraries are actually having today, as opposed to in 1976 or whatever. And that's something you don't need to go through Maya or anyone else to do that. That's something we can do. And so I think, yeah, when it comes to lobbying on specific things, it's good to coordinate, it's good to have a consistent line. And when it comes to broader activity, it's something that associations are very well placed to do, because they are civil society organizations and they can tell the government it's wrong in a way that you can't tell your boss they're wrong by contract. That's normal. But then actually it's something you can just start doing on the ground by just, doing a great job and showing it, making sure you're taking any opportunities to invite the mayor, invite the local member of parliament in, make sure that you've got you've updated your brochures, that you've all got 3 stories about the impact that your library is having. All these things you can do in preparation, and that leads to successful lobbying on copyright, but it can also lead to successful lobbying on funding, successful lobbying on library laws and everything. There's a lot of preparation work that we can do, and that makes the job of lobbying, of actually trying to change laws later, easier. And I'm also thinking maybe we need some sort of magic hand gesture for advocacy, so we don't need to use the word, so we don't scare people. Just, I don't know, that probably means something else, doesn't it? I don't know, maybe that, I don't know. Was that actually an answer to your question? I'm not good, okay. I probably had more than my time.
So thank you.
Stage. Thank you.
Thank you.